Have you ever gotten close to someone, really close, and then suddenly, without warning, they pulled away? They stopped texting, they canceled plans, they became vague, cold, emotionally distant. And your brain did what most people's brains do. It translated that behavior as rejection. You thought, they must not care, they must not feel what I feel. But what if I told you the exact opposite is true? What if that moment of withdrawal is not the absence of love, but the proof of it? Avoidants don't fear being alone. They fear being consumed. They fear losing control of themselves in love, because love, real, vulnerable, soul-shaking love requires surrender. And surrender, for someone with an avoidant attachment style, is equivalent to danger. When they pull away after getting close, it's not because you don't matter. It's because you've started to matter too much, and that shakes their internal foundation. You see, avoidance is not about not wanting connection, it's about fearing it. Deep down, they want what we all want: closeness, intimacy, unconditional acceptance. But they've been programmed, often since childhood, to believe that closeness equals pain, vulnerability equals exposure, and love equals the risk of abandonment. So when things begin to feel emotionally real, they run, but not away from you, away from the intensity of what they're feeling inside. Let me make this real for you. Imagine a person who's lived their entire life underwater, holding their breath. They've survived by controlling every movement, every emotion, every interaction. Then suddenly you come along, you open a space where they can breathe, feel, and maybe even fall. And for a moment they taste oxygen, they feel alive. But instead of staying in that oxygen, they dive back under. Why? Because the oxygen feels unfamiliar. It feels too good, too overwhelming, too real. And unfamiliar to the avoidant mind equals unsafe. So they retreat, they build emotional walls, they start acting like they don't care. But here's the paradox. They care more than they're ready to feel. They care more than they can admit to themselves. And that care scares the hell out of them. That's why they ghost you after a beautiful weekend. That's why they pull away after telling you something vulnerable. That's why they sabotage the exact thing they want. And listen carefully. This isn't a game. This isn't manipulation. This isn't them trying to hurt you. This is a trauma response masquerading as indifference. It's the nervous system screaming, get out before you get hurt. Because in their history, love has always come with pain. Maybe they had a caregiver who only gave affection when they performed. Maybe they were shamed for needing comfort. Maybe they were betrayed when they trusted. So now even healthy love feels unsafe. But here's where it gets deep. The very act of pulling away from you is a massive indicator that they felt something powerful in your presence. Most people think love is expressed through pursuit, affection, and words, but avoidants often express it through withdrawal, silence, and internal chaos. They don't run from what's meaningless. They only run when it means something. That's the twisted truth. So when an avoidant suddenly disappears right after a deep emotional exchange, you're not looking at the absence of love, you're staring into the evidence of it. Their retreat is a sign of internal overload. Their silence is not always rejection, it's protection. Not of you, but of their fragile emotional framework that hasn't yet learned how to hold intimacy without collapse. And this is where people get stuck, because your logical brain says if they cared, they'd stay. But love for the avoidant is war. It's the battle between desire and defense. They want to stay, but they've trained themselves to leave. Now, I'm not saying you should tolerate inconsistency. I'm not telling you to wait around for someone who keeps running. But what I am telling you is this. When you understand this pattern, you reclaim your power. You stop internalizing their withdrawal as your failure. You stop chasing, fixing, overperforming, and you begin to understand the language of avoidant love. And the first word in that language is retreat. It's not about letting them off the hook. It's about seeing the truth with new eyes. You can hold compassion without abandoning your standards. You can walk away without self-blame. And you can recognize that their emotional exit doesn't mean you weren't enough. It often means you were more than they were ever prepared to receive. So if someone pulled away right after connecting with you deeply, don't be so quick to doubt what was real. Don't erase the connection just because they fled from it. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes love doesn't chase. Sometimes it runs. Because love, when it's unhealed, will act like fear. And the most terrifying thing for an avoidant to feel is how deeply they've started to love you. Let that truth anchor your self-worth, not shake it. Let me tell you something that'll completely shift your perspective. Some of the loudest love is expressed in complete silence. Not everyone loves with words. Not everyone confesses with a romantic monologue, especially not the avoidant. In fact, the more they feel, the quieter they get. The more vulnerable they become, the more invisible their affection turns. It's one of the most confusing paradoxes in human behavior. They love you, but they hide it behind distance. And yet they're watching you. That's how you start to notice it. The silence feels heavy. It's not just the absence of communication. It's the presence of attention without permission. They're not texting, not calling, but somehow they're still there. Liking old posts, watching your stories, showing up on your feed the moment you post, checking mutual friends for updates about you. That's not coincidence. That's not boredom. That's intentional proximity without exposure. Because the avoidant doesn't know how to say, I miss you. So instead, they lurk. They observe. They study you from a safe distance, like you're a fire. They can't stop watching. Even though they're terrified of getting burned, they stay in your orbit, hoping you'll notice them without them having to come close. Now, this is where most people make a critical mistake. They assume this kind of behavior is passive or even manipulative. But let me challenge that thought. This isn't a game. It's a subconscious pattern rooted in fear and longing. Avoidants don't observe you from the shadows because they're trying to toy with your emotions. They do it because watching is safer than feeling exposed. Loving you out loud would mean taking emotional responsibility. And for someone who was never taught emotional safety, that feels like standing naked on a battlefield. Think about it like this. A securely attached person will knock on your door. An anxious person will bang on it. But the avoidant, they'll stand across the street and stare at the window. And when you pull the curtain back, they'll vanish like they were never there. That's how you know it's love. Real unspoken love. When an avoidant won't let you go completely, but they can't bring themselves to fully show up either. Their silence isn't empty. It's filled with the things they don't know how to say. I miss you. You matter more than I expected. I'm terrified you'll see who I really am. I want you, but I don't know how to keep you without losing myself. Every time they view your story or hover over the send button without pressing it, that's a silent scream they can't articulate. And the truth is, most of them have no idea they're even doing it. Avoidants aren't always consciously choosing this behavior. Their attachment system is wired to protect them from vulnerability, so they act out of instinct, not strategy. That's why they'll disappear for weeks and then show up again without explanation. That's why they'll accidentally like your photo or send a message at 2 a.m. and delete it. Their feelings leak through the cracks. They're trying to stay composed while their subconscious keeps betraying them. It's like emotional Morse code. They're sending you signals, flashes, fragments. But you have to understand the code. You have to see what's beneath the silence. And that requires emotional intelligence. It requires awareness. It requires the strength to see love, not just in words, but in behavior. Now, I'm not saying you should settle for breadcrumbs. I'm not saying you should chase someone who won't show up fully. But I am saying if someone is watching you from the dark, staying close without making a move, it's not because you meant nothing. It's because you meant everything, and they don't yet know how to hold that kind of emotional fire in their hands. And maybe the most frustrating part, they're waiting for you to make the first move again. Not because they're lazy or disinterested, But because if they expose themselves first and get rejected, it'll confirm every fear they've been hiding from their entire life. So what do you do with this? You stop taking their silence personally. You stop internalizing their emotional freeze as proof of your inadequacy. And you begin to see it for what it really is. Proof that your presence impacted them more deeply than they could admit. That's why they're still around. That's why they're watching. That's why they haven't let you go. And here's what's wild. The more you stand in your power, the more your silence begins to say what your words never could. You become the mirror they can't avoid. You become the presence they tried to escape but can't forget. You become the lesson their heart keeps circling back to. So don't underestimate the weight of their silent attention. Don't dismiss it. Don't inflate it either, but understand it. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one whose heart is shouting the loudest. And sometimes when an avoidant watches you from afar, it's not detachment. It's the most love they've ever dared to show. There's a strange pattern that happens when you're emotionally entangled with an avoidant. You pull back and they come closer. You get quiet and suddenly they want to talk. You stop reaching out and now they're watching, liking, texting, and it leaves you confused. You start questioning your own reality. Why does it feel like they only notice me when I step away? You wonder if you were imagining the whole thing when you were fully present. Because when you gave your all, they acted indifferent. But the moment you detach, something shifts. Let me tell you exactly what's going on. Avoidants don't respond to closeness the way secure people do. Love doesn't register them as comfort. It registers as pressure. And pressure for them triggers a primal instinct to escape. When you lean in, they lean out. When you offer consistency, they brace for loss. Because in their subconscious mind, closeness equals danger. So what do? They retreat, detach, and put up walls, not because they don't feel something, but because they do. And that very feeling threatens the emotional independence they've used to survive. But then you do something unexpected. You stop chasing. You stop feeding the pattern. You interrupt the cycle. And that's when something fascinating happens. They begin to mirror your distance, but not in a game-playing tit-for-tat kind of way. No, it's deeper. It's biological, it's psychological, it's emotional resonance. They begin to reflect your energy because they're suddenly aware of the vacuum your absence creates. Your pullback exposes the attachment wound they've tried so hard to suppress, and they begin to feel the very thing they told themselves they didn't need, connection. You want to know how you really impact an avoidant? It's not through your love, it's through your absence. Because in your silence, something inside them finally wakes up. When you're always there, always calling, texting, proving your worth, they don't have to confront their emotions. But when you step back, you create emotional spaciousness. And in that space, they feel their own feelings rise. It's not that you didn't matter before, it's that now, in your absence, they can't deny that you matter too much. Avoidants are emotional mirrors, but not in the way you think. They won't mirror your affection. They'll mirror your boundaries. They won't respond to your emotional pursuit, but they will respond when you stop reaching. And here's why. Your detachment removes their internal excuse that you're overwhelming them. When you pull back, they no longer have your energy to push against. The noise goes silent. The friction disappears. And now all they're left with is themselves. That's the moment where the truth emerges. That's when the love that was buried under layers of defense starts to surface. Because without your presence constantly pursuing them, they begin to feel the gap. And that gap triggers the very thing they've been avoiding all along, vulnerability. You see, we've been trained to think that love is shown in grand gestures, that people only care when they come toward us openly, passionately, clearly. But avoidants operate in emotional opposites. Their way of showing interest doesn't look like closeness. It looks like inconsistency. It looks like them inching closer only after you walk away. It looks like them replaying your last words long after the conversation ended. Because in that silence, they finally feel safe enough to reflect. So when they start mirroring your distance, don't rush to fill the space. Don't mistake it for rejection. Understand it for what it is, a psychological recalibration. Their system is adjusting to the absence of emotional pressure. And in that stillness, their feelings begin to thaw. They begin to feel what they've been avoiding. And here's the thing. It's not your job to teach them how to process that. Your role isn't to fix their fear or decode every mixed signal. Your job is to recognize what their behavior is telling you. That your presence left a mark deep enough that your absence echoes. That's not emptiness, that's resonance. That's not detachment, that's delayed realization. When they begin to mirror you, when they start watching you after you stop calling, when they react to your silence instead of your words. That's not indifference, that's their system trying to reconcile the emotional earthquake you caused. So instead of panicking when they start acting like you, take it as confirmation. Because only someone who's emotionally impacted starts to reflect. Indifference doesn't imitate, but love, especially love that hasn't been emotionally matured yet, mirrors. Don't get caught in the illusion that your absence makes you forgettable. Often it's the exact opposite. Your silence becomes the mirror that forces them to face what they've been denying all along, how deeply they feel. And if you ever doubt your worth in the process, just remember this. They didn't react to your presence because they felt safe. They reacted to your absence because they finally felt the cost of losing you. Have you ever had someone tell you right after things got emotionally intense, I'm not ready for a relationship, or you deserve better than me, or this is moving too fast? And you're left sitting there confused because you weren't asking them to marry you. You weren't demanding anything. You were just being real, honest, present. So why does that moment of vulnerability, where connection was finally building, turn into a shutdown? Or why does it feel like every time things start to get deep, the avoidance suddenly gets logical, rational, cold? Here's the truth. Avoidance will often try to cover emotional intensity with logic. They will use intellectual excuses to hide what their heart is screaming. They'll pretend it's about timing, about personal growth, about work stress, or about not wanting to hurt you. But if you strip away all the rehearsed words, what you'll find underneath is a truth they can't say out loud. I don't know how to handle the fact that I'm falling for you. Avoidants fear emotional exposure the way some people fear fire. They've learned through experience, childhood trauma, or painful relationships that intimacy equals pain, that love equals loss, that vulnerability equals danger. So when their heart starts to lean toward you, their mind slams the brakes. They hit you with logic. Not because they're being honest, but because logic is safe. Logic is armor. Logic creates distance, and distance is where they feel in control. So when you hear phrases like, I just don't want to hurt you, or I think we're better off as friends, after you just shared something real, don't assume it means they don't care. Sometimes it means they care too much, and they don't have the tools to handle it. They're trying to shut the door before the flood of emotions drowns them. They're trying to push you away before you see the parts of them they've never shown anyone. Because let's be brutally honest. If they didn't care, they wouldn't need a speech. Indifference doesn't explain itself. Indifference doesn't overthink. Indifference doesn't craft excuses wrapped in emotional self-sabotage. But love that feels threatening, love that cracks open the parts of you you've spent a lifetime trying to hide, that's where avoidance kicks in. And what makes it more confusing is that the logic sounds convincing. It's smooth, polished, well-practiced. It's because avoidants often live in their heads. They use intellect to avoid their emotions. They can break down their feelings in a way that sounds emotionally intelligent, but it's really just emotional deflection. Let's take this deeper, because this isn't just about relationships. This is about the human condition. We all wear masks, but avoidants wear intellectual masks that are harder to see through. They disguise fear as clarity. They cloak rejection as compassion. And unless you understand the psychology behind it, you'll take their words at face value and internalize it as your failure. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to realize that when someone pushes you away with logic, right after they've emotionally connected with you, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting their own vulnerability, their own surrender. They're terrified of the truth that's rising in their chest, and rather than face it, they run from it. They try to manage it. They intellectualize it to death. But love isn't logical. Connection isn't a checklist. It's messy, raw, irrational. And for someone who's built their identity around control, that kind of surrender is a threat. So here's the million-dollar truth. When an avoidant starts talking in circles, using reason to explain why they need space, right after you finally got close, pay more attention to what they're not saying. Because behind every "you deserve better" is often a "I'm scared I'm not enough." Behind every "this is moving too fast" is "I didn't expect to feel this much this soon." Behind every "I just need time" is a soul whispering, "I'm overwhelmed by how much I want this, and I don't trust myself to hold it." So you've got a choice. You can believe the surface story and collapse your self-worth in response to someone else's fear. Or you can understand the truth, hold your power, and refuse to personalize their emotional limitations. You're not too much because someone couldn't handle their feelings for you. You're not wrong because someone couldn't receive the love you gave. Sometimes the way they retreat isn't a reflection of your intensity. It's a sign they've never had love this real before. So next time you hear logic replacing intimacy, don't beg for clarity. Don't chase explanation. Just watch. Watch how they armor themselves in intellect when their heart starts to feel real fire. Because that armor, that distance, that rational shutdown, that's not the absence of love. That's love trying to survive inside someone who doesn't know how to hold it. Let them go if you must, but never again question what your presence triggered. One of the biggest lies you've ever been told is that avoidants move on quickly, that they can walk away, cut contact, disappear, and it means they never cared. But that's surface level thinking. That's how people interpret behavior when they haven't looked deeper than actions. The truth is more complex, more confronting, more human. Avoidants don't forget you. They don't just move on. They don't wipe the slate clean and pretend it never happened. No. What they do is detach externally while remaining emotionally connected internally. They pretend to let go. They look like they're fine, but inside, they're haunted by the ghost of what they never resolved. Because avoidance isn't about letting go, it's about avoiding pain, avoiding confrontation, avoiding themselves. And the longer they avoid their feelings, the longer you live in the back of their mind, rent-free. You become the what if that doesn't die, the question that doesn't get answered, the emotion that never fully got processed. See, most people misunderstand how avoidants grieve or attach. They don't break down the day after you leave. They don't cry in the moment. They're too busy protecting their nervous system. They bury the emotion, suppress it, lock it in a vault. But emotional suppression is not emotional release. It's emotional delay. And delayed emotions come back with interest. You have to understand that many avoidants have been conditioned to emotionally self-abandon. That means they don't even feel safe enough to feel their own feelings, let alone express them to someone else. So when a connection ends, especially one that felt deep, they don't process it. They compartmentalize it. But just because it's buried doesn't mean it's gone. You'd be shocked how often they still think about you, how often your name crosses their mind, how often they check to see if you're still watching them, still care, still within reach. They won't admit it. They might even tell themselves they've moved on. But deep inside, your energy lingers, not because they want to keep you trapped there, but because they never fully dealt with what they felt when they had you. This is why you'll see avoidance come back months later, sometimes years, out of nowhere, with a message that seems random, a comment that catches you off guard, or a sudden reappearance that has no context. It's not random. It's unresolved. The feelings didn't vanish. They finally resurfaced. Because love doesn't die just because someone doesn't know how to express it. Let me be clear. This doesn't excuse their behavior. This isn't a free pass for ghosting, avoidance, or emotional immaturity. But it is an explanation rooted in psychology, not fantasy. Avoidants experience attachment trauma. And trauma doesn't move in a straight line. It loops. It delays. It repeats. It confuses. That's why they can be in love with you and leave you at the same time. That's why they can miss you desperately but not say a word. That's why they can still feel connected even when there's no contact. And here's the kicker. The less closure they had with you, the stronger the emotional residue becomes. Because the human mind hates loose ends. It wants resolution, it wants finality, but avoidants avoid that too. They skip the tough conversations. They vanish instead of dealing, so they never get the emotional closure they need, and you become unfinished business in their soul. That's why you're still in their playlists. That's why they still scroll through your old pictures. That's why certain songs, scents, or places bring you right back to their mind. You were never erased. You were suppressed. And now the feelings are rising again, and they don't know what to do with them. So here's what I want you to take away from this. If they haven't replaced you, if they haven't blocked you, if they haven't let go of your memory, there's a reason, and it's not because you're forgettable. It's because you left an imprint they couldn't process in real time. You were never just a phase. You were never just a lesson. You were a mirror, a trigger, a catalyst, a reflection of something they both craved and feared. And in their silence, in their delay, in their emotional paralysis, they still carry you. But that doesn't mean you wait. That doesn't mean you stay stuck in the illusion of potential. You honor the truth. You move forward. You let them figure it out on their own time, because healing can't be forced. But don't you dare question whether you mattered. Because if an avoidant still carries the memory of you long after you're gone, it's not by accident. It's proof that even those who hide from love aren't immune to it. Let that truth set you free. Sometimes love doesn't come running after you when you leave. Sometimes it stays standing there, frozen, afraid, and unable to speak. And that's especially true when you're dealing with an avoidant. You might walk away expecting resistance, a fight, a desperate plea, but instead there's silence, no reaction, no confrontation, no chase. And you start to believe the worst lie of all. I must not have meant anything to them. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes an avoidant's greatest act of love is letting you walk away, not because they wanted to lose you, but because deep down they believed they were unworthy of keeping you. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because we've been taught to associate love with pursuit. If someone doesn't fight for you, we assume it means they didn't care. But avoidants don't function by conventional emotional rules. Love to them doesn't feel like light. It feels like exposure. It doesn't feel like warmth. It feels like pressure. And when their nervous system is overwhelmed, they don't chase, they shut down. You need to understand something deeply here. Many avoidants have never learned how to receive love. They know how to perform, to provide, to stay in control, but surrendering to genuine intimacy, that terrifies them. Because intimacy demands vulnerability. It requires you to believe you're worthy of being seen, chosen, and kept. And that's exactly where avoidants struggle the most. So when you leave, especially after giving them every chance to show up, and they don't come after you, don't rush to label that as indifference. In many cases, that is emotional paralysis. That is shame disguising itself as apathy. That is a wounded inner child whispering, if I try to get them back, they'll see how broken I really am. It's easier to say nothing than to risk rejection. Easier to stay silent than to reveal the depth of their love and have it not be returned. Because for an avoidant, vulnerability doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like annihilation. So they don't fight for you, not because they didn't love you, but because they never believed they deserved your love to begin with. Let that sink in. You see, when someone allows you to leave without resistance, that's not always a reflection of your value. It's often a reflection of their own internal unworthiness. They believe letting you go is a gift, that releasing you from their emotional chaos is the only kind thing they can do. And it is their version of love, a distorted one, a quiet one, but real nonetheless. And the tragedy is you may never know it in the moment because they won't say it, they won't show it, they won't fight for you, not because they don't care, but because they've already decided the outcome in their own head. They've convinced themselves you're better off without them. But days go by, then weeks, then months, and you're still in their mind, still in their heart, still living inside that sacred space where they keep their regrets, their fears, and the people they